for making it in the sort of storm that we're about to experience. But I'd like to first begin by acknowledging that we're gathering today on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the new First Credit Nation. And I'd also like to point out that this is still the land of those people, and it's still the home of many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We can learn a lot from them, and I've learned a lot in the last few years, so I'd encourage all of you to look into the stories, the myths, and also the archaeology. There's so much to learn about an ecological way of life from the traditional peoples. I'd also like to thank Jane from the York Heritage Development Group, who have let us use this beautiful space, and they're going to be coming by, so we can thank them again later. But the washrooms, for your reference, are on the left at the back, and that's good. I'd also like to thank Jane Gorovich for our graphics. That sort of was the theme for the event. She helped me way back when we were just starting the event. And I'd also like to thank the speakers, Eric Davies, Chris Magwood, Christina Choltan, Rob Avis, Yael Santo-Pinto, and Daimen Hardie, as well as the volunteers, Sonia, Evelyn, Fotini, Simone, Zach, Lauren, and I hope I didn't forget. Now, I wanted to just recapitulate the sort of reasons why we're gathered here today. This symposium was organized to bring together designers, architects, engineers, futurists, urban planners, and many other people that associate with design around the context of the eco-crisis. Now, some of you may not have heard the word eco-crisis, but there's other words that float around, but an eco-crisis is defined as the collapse of the support systems of an ecosystem due to changes in the environment. If you are awake, you'll know that we're faced with a dramatic eco-crisis without parallel since the dinosaurs died, basically. The reason we're here as designers, and I think what is most exciting for me to see so many people here, is because when we implement a design, we take a few minutes or a few hours or a few days of decisions and we put them into motion, potentially for the rest of, well, realistically for 50 or 100 years. And a moment's decision could have a massive impact. It could be amplified when it's actually built or realized by 1,000 or 1,000,000 times. Some of the presenters are going to talk about the impacts that our decisions have this way. Now, the symposium has 3 goals. I want to foster a conversation about the role that designers have in the eco-crisis. As designers in the past, we have made decisions which have eroded the ozone, which have created climate change, which generate a huge amount of waste. First, we need to acknowledge those. Secondly, I want to share examples of ecological design, and I think all the speakers today each have a very unique perspective on what ecological design is and how it can manifest. And I hope you're surprised by what they have to say. And the second thing is I'd like to facilitate networking amongst like-minded people, and that's all you guys. And so to do that, we need to break down the barriers which might separate us. And I want to just take a moment, literally a minute or two, for you all to introduce yourself to the people sitting around you, your name, and why you're here. Ahead of the curve.
I can't hear you.
Okay, guys. We'll take a while to talk during the break. Okay, for real, it starts. I hope that's a good intro for everyone to each other. I just want to make a comment to this event. There's a great poem that says the revolution will not be televised, and I just want to say this event is not sponsored by anyone. It's sponsored by you, it's sponsored by me, and I want that to sort of create an environment where we can speak truth and share real ideas and feelings. So the three key words: proactive, pragmatic, and direct action. We want to be focused on proactive solutions rather than focused on problems. We want to focus on solutions that are actually implementable. And I think, Daimen's going to talk about trees. When people are talking about carbon sequestration, they're trying to reinvent the tree. It's not going to, so pragmatically, planting trees is much simpler than seeding the atmosphere with sulfur dioxide. But anyway, and the third element is direct action, which maybe some of you are familiar with, some of you aren't. This is the idea that you don't need permission to do what you believe in. And you may not work in an institution or a firm or a company which has any mandate for ecological design or sustainable design. Your clients may not ask for sustainable design, but as designers, you can be an ecological designer. You don't need to ask for permission. If you're going to specify in architecture a certain type of insulation, one or the other, just make the choice and specify that, and that should be a starting point. You don't need permission. The schedule for the event, we have a very full schedule, so we're going to try to be punctual. We've got 2 presentations to start by Eric Davies and Daimen. Then we're going to have questions after each presentation, a 10-minute, realistically 10-minute break, then 2 more, and then one more presentation and a round table. We're going to try to have 45 minutes to an hour lunch. We'll be flexible a bit there. 2 more presentations, and then in the afternoon, a presentation, a final round table, and an unconference with closing remarks. And many of you may not know what an unconference is. An unconference is a participant-driven mini conference with different breakout sessions that you want to host. So if you want to talk about something, and I'm thinking about it like this: if you want to learn something, if you want to gain information from people, then you should write what you want to learn on a sheet up at the check-in desk. If you write something, you have to leave that session. But the other thing is, if you get stuck in a session that you are not enjoying or you find you want to change, the law of 2 feet: get up, move around, circulate. It's got to be dynamic so that we can engage. And then the goal after this unconference will be to have a really quick synopsis by each breakout group of what they discussed, what they learned, and maybe their findings. And I just wanted to share and end with this last quote: "Sitting at our back doorsteps, all we need to live a good life lies about us. The sun, wind, people, buildings, stones, the sea, birds, and plants all surround us. Cooperation with these things brings harmony. Opposition brings disaster." So that's all my remarks for the introduction, and the first speaker will be Eric Davies. Oh, and the coffee is warming up. So. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Up more? Okay. Okay, thank you so much for the invite tonight. Thank you to Jeff. I really, really appreciate the offer. And I find you're a really warm person and a good thinker. This kind of thing, I think, is a really exciting thing to be part of. So, big round of applause. Yeah, sorry, more louder. Okay, I'll try to put this up a little bit more.
was just saying, I met Jeff over the past year through a talk to see actually Daimen speak last year. And, you know, through chatting with Jeff, I've found a lot of really interesting ideas, a lot of positivity about bringing people together. And so it's a real pleasure to be here. And the title I'm using is this old kind of deep ecology expression, thinking like a mountain, which was an Aldo Leopold essay about thinking big. I think it's something we don't really do enough of. There are these big problems, and to solve them, we'll need big solutions. And if we do it, we'll have big benefits. Just quickly, the outline of these, the big problem I'm interested in is the kind of urban ecology, urban ecosystems. This is some of the work that I focus on in Toronto. The big solution is kind of really what Jeff, you're trying to do here, is get people together from these different fields to work through this. And this kind of idea of rewilding and growing millions of native plants and restoring plants and animals. The benefits are pretty obvious. Obviously, ecological function it generates a lot of money, and then human health and happiness, I think, is really the benefit. Jeff had asked me to put up a slide about. Said, "Can you have a slide of what is ecology?" And the slide is a pretty tricky kind of thing to put into a slide, but this is kind of an attempt to put into a slide what I think are important elements of ecology. And so on the one frame here, you see biodiversity, and you can think about the ecology of individual species, the ecology of a butterfly or a tree, and each individual species has its own ecology within itself and how it interacts with other organisms, other species, and its place in ecosystems. And then there's the ecology, these species assemble into ecosystems, right? So there's the ecology of an ecosystem, how an ecosystem works. And it kind of gets more complex. Then you have the ecology of ecosystem services. The species make ecosystems, and ecosystems produce ecosystem services. And finally, this kind of new concept, it's an old idea, but newly popular, of resilience. Everyone wants to have the species to be resilient to decline, and ecosystems to be resilient to collapse. And then ecosystem services, this is where a lot of really what we want, especially I guess in terms of design of these services, we want the production of these services to be resilient. And this common metaphor that's used to think about ecological value is the rivet hypothesis. Many of you might have heard of Paul Ehrlich. He wrote The Population Bomb. He's a brilliant evolutionary ecologist and a pioneer. And so he describes this, if you think of a vehicle, it's composed of all these parts, right? And he just describes the rivet hypothesis that you can be driving along and you can start throwing pieces off the car or the airplane, and that you can throw away quite a number of them, but you'll throw away one part and you don't know what it is. It could be a rivet, it could be whatever, and then the machine will break, and that's kind of how an ecosystem functions. And this picture for me, I think, really sums up where ecosystems are at today. They're moving so fast, it's like a NASCAR race, right? And these things are driving 322 kilometers an hour around a bank. And you can't really afford to tinker with these too much, right? And our ecosystems now are under so much pressure that we can't really toy with them as much as we could when we weren't affecting them so much. And so when you watch a NASCAR race, I don't know how many of you have done this, but you look at this pit crew here, and those people up on that deck are this entire car is tuned into machinery that is evaluating every element of this car. And when one little thing goes wrong, on a microsecond, this thing pulls in, and all these people have one little task to get this car back in peak optimal working performance in the back of the track, right? But when you look at ecology nowadays, like we have NASCAR technology up here, and then ecosystem technology is way down here, right? So we have to bring ecological design and ecological management at least up to the level of NASCAR, right? But hopefully up to the level of NASA. And that will require this kind of collaborative working with designers, and it'll be bringing this expertise to bear on the restoration of ecosystems and the monitoring of ecosystems and the management of ecosystems. I really like, Jeff, how you frame this in an eco-crisis. I think a lot of people don't think there's an eco-crisis, or if there is, how big is it, right? And so just a few days ago, this new World Economic Forum report came out. They have this as an annual report on global risks. And if you look at top risks facing the world today, they're now primarily ecological. These ecological risks are the most likely to happen, and they will have the most impact. So here's a graph. You can see, and just to note even at the color, the green one, so you'll see how they cluster up at the top here. They have the highest likelihood and they have the highest impact, right? And then the other financial, some of the financial ones in blue that we typically think about, deflation, unemployment, well, these are massive problems. They are, kind of clustering down near the bottom area of the parameter space. So the ecological collapse really is real. And so bringing this into kind of my field of the ecological collapse in urban ecosystems, I'm going to talk a little bit about the ecological collapse in urban ecosystems and really how we can restore them. My interest, a lot of what I do goes back to Aldo Leopold. He's a original kind of philosopher for really the rights of nature, inspired by Thoreau for the rights of people. And he early recognized in the 30s that ecosystems were getting transformed. All native species were disappearing, especially plants. And he was concerned that by replacing ecosystems with non-native plants, it would disrupt the flow of energy through ecosystems. And so this is a paper from 1939. And he regarded this as the primary important feature of designing an ecosystem was energy flow through the ecosystem. And the modern concept, again, if you have native plants at the bottom, you have all these trophic levels and the energy will flow through. And if you replace the plants, which is the foundation of an ecosystem, you don't have anything above there. So I did a bunch of research on this, compared native and non-native vegetation in downtown Toronto to try to get a practical perspective on how this works. We put up all these insect traps over all these trees, and we looked at trees across a whole sweep. And you don't really have to get into this graph, but just notice that the green dot on the top is native species. And at the end of the summer, if you look at a leaf on a native tree or a native plant, about 20% of it will be gone. The leaf will be eaten, and that energy will go into the ecosystem. And then as you get more non-native, you get down to a ginkgo, which hasn't been in the continent of North America since the continents were together. 5 million years ago, and there it's zero. You will never find a ginkgo with one bite, and it'll take millions of years for a ginkgo to ever be useful. But you don't even have to do the statistics on this. You can just pull down a trap, and the vial on the left is what the insects you get from a non-native tree, and the vial on the right is the insects you get from a native tree. There's thousands of insects in Toronto. And when we lose the insects, there's this brilliant scientist, Dan Jansen. If you haven't heard of them, these guys are maybe a little unknown in popular media, but just pioneers of ecology. And he said, what escapes the eye, however, is a much more insidious type of extinction. It's the extinction of ecological interactions. This is the thing that is really significant. When we lose a bee, we lose pollination, right? And then we lose food. Aaron Ellison, another remarkable guy. He's a genius. This guy is the editor of top journals. He's the head of Harvard Forest, and he wrote this paper, Loss of Foundation Species. And when trees are at the top, when you remove a tree, you're removing thousands of species and interactions we don't know about. And a lot of this, in terms of design, has come back to some popular work by Douglas Talabey. He has this really simple book, Bringing Nature Home. And by planting native plants, again, you can take these dead ecosystems and rejuvenate them back. So in terms of, there's still quite a bit of popular debate about this. A lot of people think, oh, well, native plants don't survive in urban areas. I mean, that's a kind of a ridiculous idea. If you think that if we got all the native trees from plants in Toronto and we planted them in Tokyo or something, they wouldn't just magically survive, right? But how big is this problem? And this is something that, when I started doing my research, I was making these claims to my committee, like, oh, just look around, the city is all non-native plants. And they said, well, where's the citation for that? There's no citation. So I did a study where I looked at cities in North America that had urban tree lists and looked at what was native, what proportion of the trees were native. And really what drives this is what Toronto recommends planting, for instance. And most of these, the trees they recommend planting are in red. These are trees from other continents that are known to be toxic and invasive. The middle ones are from southern North America, and then the green ones would be a small fraction of what is native. And actually some of these are not even native to Toronto. And because of that, this one didn't come up, but it just shows you that the trees in Toronto, more than 50% of the trees in downtown Toronto are not native. 25% of all the trees in downtown Toronto are Norway native, right? If you were to look at the 73 native trees in Toronto, and then you look at the $1 million survey we did to see what is there, about half of them didn't even show up one time. And that's including things like the white pine, the provincial tree. So 44% of the trees in Toronto are not found in the survey. They do still exist hidden in places, but they're not turning up. When you look at all the trees in Toronto, most of them are non-native. These things are known to be toxic, potentially invasive. So now 64% of the trees in Toronto species in the survey are non-native. Now, in terms of, for you folks, when you look back, this is all the cities in North America. What you can look at here is the black. This circle here is what should be in every city. The black is what is gone, the green is what remains, and the red is the non-native stuff. So in terms of a designer, if you want to do something really cool and sexy as a designer, why don't you bring back a species of tree that we don't have here, right? Like there's something that is not only ecologically functional, but also, you know, potentially monetarily valuable. You know, it adds some spice to the design and you're doing something that's good. So this is Jeff asked, you know, what are some examples of quick decisions you can do? And there's something to think about, using native species, but also maybe use the dark diversity species that are missing, bring them back. Of course, the urban areas surround the ravines. We have this ravine strategy. This is Crothers Woods, which is regarded as one of the premier sites in Toronto. And as you can see from this picture, it's not premier by an ecologist estimation. And the ravines are massive. They're 17% of the city of Toronto. This is one of the largest urban ecosystems in a major city, I think, in the Northern Hemisphere. I don't know of a larger one, but it's very significant. And we had found an old study. The only study that we know of that had permanent plots, it was conducted in 1977. And we resurveyed the original data. And again, without getting into the numbers, wildflowers, they're down. Where do you find trilliums anymore? Like the trillium is a provincial flower. You're supposed to find thousands of them, tens of thousands of them. And you do when you go outside the city. They're gone. Insects are very difficult to survey. This guy, David Beadle, he lives in Toronto. He wrote the book Moths of North America. He's just a remarkable person, brilliant, very kind, and he helped us. They're down, the birds, they're down 84% of the area. That's sensitive birds are down. Mammals, again, horizontal mammals and small mammals. The flying squirrel, many people don't know that it used to be in Toronto. It's no longer in a core. There are some peripheral areas, but we can bring the species back. We can rewild it, and they have done that. And the shocking thing really comes with the plants, because you can see them easily. And if you just look at the plots we did here, I'll just show you. This is in the Rosedale Ravine area, right near Evergreen Brook. So we went out and we refound these plots and we resurveyed them all. And then we extrapolated the data. So this would be ravines, 100% native. This would have been 100 years ago or so. And in 1977, this is the approximate density of non-native trees. Okay? 10%, 15%. When we resurveyed it in 2015, it's about 40. And if you just use a conventional extrapolation of that data, a conservative extrapolation, this is where it's going. And some areas are already like this, right? So together, if you look at where the urban areas are going and where the ravines are going in the future, if you extrapolate it out, that's where the urban and natural areas are going. So where's a complete collapse. And when you get this far, it becomes really difficult to bring ecosystems back, because they get in alternative stable states, and it's very, very difficult to bring them back. But so terms of the solution, we want to figure out how can we turn this around and get more plants back. And for as bad as it is, it's quite easy to do if we think big and come together. And so the solutions really with this is kind of Jeff, what you're trying to do here is get people to collaborate on this at all levels. I think the idea of rewilding, many of you have probably heard this, is probably the simplest idea to focus on. And we need to literally grow millions of plants because we can't restore animals when there's no plants. You can't bring flying squirrels back when there's no oaks and acorns. We wrapped this study, this 3-year study we had, up into a report. And if anyone's interested in looking at this report, our main recommendations are kind of, again, to bring people together, not just ecologists, but everyone. And as we were writing this report, there was an article, a couple actually members, Kathy Burka up in the front here, and Esther. When we were assembling this report, New York City, the New York Times had this article where they're advocating for $385 million for 10,000 acres. We have 27,000 acres. So just to kind of contextualize where this would be, it would be like $500 million, maybe $1 billion. But I saw in the news today that the TTC wants 29 billion or 33 billion for the transportation. So again, putting this in the context of thinking big, it's not that big. So I'll just leave those 2 things there. If anyone's interested in that, you can check in on there. And so the solution, this idea of rewilding. Many of you probably know George Malviel here in this room. He's quite an intellectual power thinker, real positive fellow. Almost, I find everything he writes is forward thinking and ahead of the curve. And he went all in on this. This is the idea that he thinks is the most important idea he's come across in his life. And he's not an ecologist. A mass restoration of ecosystems, because not only does it rewild the ecosystems, but it rewilds people. And this, at the end of the day, is what we need to do. There's really nothing more beautiful to think about than rewilding the life that's all around us. And again, this will benefit us. Also, turning to the rewilding of Toronto. Major project I've been working on for a number of years is being retooling the tree nursery. And this is with a mentor of mine, Craig Applegate, the Dialogue Design. Actually, I think partially how I maybe met you, Daimen, through a talk that was co-hosted by there. And so he had heard about the work and said, well, I'm trying to save the world, so we've got to meet. And then we went out, and then he said, well, I know this guy, James Somerville. This is the largest tree nursery in Ontario, thousands of acres, right? And he wants to retool the nursery to go completely native and get into permaculture and save the world. So a number of years ago, we went out for a tour, and the idea is retooling the nursery to offer local, high-quality native seeds, and not just native, because if you go and buy a native tree, the silver maple goes down to Texas, right? You want a local native tree because the genes in that tree are adapted to the local area and the biodiversity is adapted to them. So this is a close colleague of mine, Alex Stepniak. One of the best guys I've ever worked with. He's just a very hard worker, a very warm soul. And we have this kind of passion project of mapping out these large trees in the Toronto ravines for seed sources to use to retool the nursery. And this is actually before they re-amalgamated or changed the number of wards, but we had made one of these maps for each ward in the hopes that we can link with the councillors and get people to map the trees in the area. And we've since mapped about 1,000 of these large trees in the Toronto ravines, mostly, and then also prominent trees in the city. This is the one at Queen's Park, collecting acorns from it there. It's just a remarkable tree. We don't know how old this is, even core. Here's a tree at the Royal Ontario Museum, the big white oak. This is George. He says he's had his ice cream truck there for 50 years. And when I went up to start collecting the acorns, he ran out of the truck and said, no, you can't mess with this tree. This is a very special tree. I said, oh, George, we're growing them. He couldn't believe it because it's his favorite tree. So he gave us free ice cream, and then now every day he comes to pull up his truck. He'd actually stop his truck and instead of driving over these precious acorns, because the white oak only produces crops 5 to 20 times a century, he'd pick them up off the road and throw them up and let us collect them. Here's another tree at U of T. And this is a fellow who was in the community housing project or whatever. And he helped us for about an hour and told us his philosophies and ideas about nature. He's a really smart guy. And this is just this experience we have over and over every time you are picking up a seeds and a tree or meeting people. This is a quote from a little Gimple that I think is really important. Their ability to perceive quality in nature begins as an art of the pretty. It expands through successive stages of the beautiful to values as yet uncaptured by language. And so we don't know all the reasons why ecosystems are valuable or all the benefits they have, but you need to start with these things that people do find beautiful and useful. And from there, use it as a kind of gateway experience to improving things. And through this work, this wonderful woman, Megan Ogilvie at the Toronto Star said, well, let's do a collaborative thing where we try to make it happen. And so she wrote this article, and now it's a weekly article, and people will write in with their favorite tree around. And again, it's putting these little dots on the map. So these are like little, I don't know what they're just like, they're sentinels for peace and positivity. The more of these trees we can find, not only collect the seeds to grow them, but just as epicenters of positivity. And so collected these seeds, and part of the problem with collecting the seeds is they're really high up in the canopy. And the squirrels in Toronto are as you know, there's a lot of them. These things are very tasty, so we had to invent some pole systems to get them. So here's a picture of Kathy, my friend here, and we needed massive bamboo poles, so I called Kathy, and she drove up to Toronto Bamboo, which is a cool storage center just in Toronto, and she put these 14-foot bamboo poles on her roof, probably illegally, and drove all the way back to my house and dropped them off, and then so we could go out, and this is a massive tree in Nordlander. And so we assembled these poles, collect all these seeds, and we actually got so many this year that we filled our quota at the nurseries, and Catherine and a bunch of these folks have been working with private schools because it's a first step. It's easy to work with them. So we got them all shipped up, and then Esther, my friend Esther, we made a nursery in the front yard, and Esther donated the soil, and then the company donated the wood, and so it's kind of collaborative design. And then a lot of them, and this is kind of, I guess, where it would link with you folks, and the thing that I would invite you to participate in is, this goes back to James. We had these seeds, and with this nursery, a lot of what they grow is Christmas trees, and the oldest Christmas tree farm in Canada, really. His grandfather went to U of T forestry, and his vision is to kind of retool, and not just Christmas trees, but native ones. So he platted the soil, beautiful sandy soil. We've now planted all these oak trees, and that's the largest supply of locally grown native trees that we know of from known provenance trees. However, we're at the spot now where, and this is where you guys come in, is we're kind of coming about this backwards. Like, we're getting the trees, then we're kind of going to folks who are doing developments and saying, oh, do you want trees? But it can't work that way. This is the lower dawn. I don't know if you've heard about this, but this has been in the works for 10 years, and I just heard a few months ago from folks that they need 1 million plants this spring. So they've started to call up nurseries asking for local native plants they don't have. So this is where the next phase of this comes in, and this kind of, I guess, folks here is to forward think this and talk to the developers now and say, well, if you got a development that's coming down 5 years or so down the road, how can we pay for these trees now, get them growing, so when you want to do a development, they'll be available. And so the next phase of this work is we're going to have a summit meeting in late March or April, where we hopefully try to change this kind of linear thinking of, well, ecologists aren't really involved in this kind of thing now, but to try to make this kind of linear planning a bit more circular and really focus on developers. And so we've got some funding from the Toronto Parks and Trees Foundation, and the chair there, Andrew Sabara, from the Savard Development Group, has really provided a lot of, he's very into nature and is being able to provide us with a lot of insight about the types of things and, you know, that developers would need and how we could actually make this happen. And it's really inspirational. And so we would like to, you know, invite anyone here that's interested in, that works in this field of large orders of plants. And I noticed when I was, Christina is here presenting. Is Christina here somewhere? I just love this, and I envision, again, these things happen all the time. And when they want the plants, what do they use? Well, hopefully in the future, projects like this will be able to use local. And I love this. We'll hear more from Yale later. When I saw this, I thought, wow, like each one of those balconies could have a little plant on their little nursery. And people often say, oh, people in apartment buildings can't get engaged because we only have a little nursery. But what we need to do is grow millions of these little plants. And could we empower people to grow them? How would that empower them personally, and they would be involved in it? It's really exciting. So I think I'll leave it there with the you know, again, what will the Don River look like? Well, hopefully it will look and function like a beautiful, healthy ecosystem. But we'll need millions of plants to do this. So I think, how's my time? Is that?
We still have 5 minutes.
So we got 5 minutes. Well, I think more. Well, I would just, if you're interested in this meeting, let me know. If you know anyone that would be, please let me know. A couple of things and benefits. I just found this old picture. I kind of liked it. This is for temperance. It was convincing people to not drink alcohol, which after the holidays, I'm sure a lot of us can kind of appreciate. But the thing I liked about it is I started reading all these little balls of the benefits of not drinking, and it's kind of the same benefits of planting a healthy ecosystem. The more, you know, you look at it like, oh wow, yeah, it makes you feel happier and all this stuff. And there's so many of the benefits of beautifying and restoring nature are really yet to be discovered. And if we bring back the native vegetation, we're going to bring back our wildflowers, and we'll bring back the insects, we'll bring back the birds. The flying squirrel, actually just yesterday, we've been working on this project for about 5 years with the Ministry of Natural Resources to try to restore flying squirrels. Really, we've got to go get 40 females and 40 males, and we've got to find out the areas with the trauma you can restore them, and put little collars on them so you can track them. I just think that's so cool that we could do this. Like the woodland jumping nose, or the southern bogland. You know? And these are old pleas. This is an old book from 1939, and I just love how they say the wildflowers, we repeat, are living fellow creatures. They have each of them a small personality of their own and a clear right with other small creatures like butterflies, songbirds, and squirrels to their place in the sun, with the freedom, peace, and content of their woodland homes and haunts. And I often think, I guess myself, the group of 7, I do my speeches, Mom Thompson, grade 4 or 5. So he's been a hero for a long time, and I always, you know, it influenced me in many ways. But I always said, well, if you went to the AGO and you noticed a fungus on the group of 7 paintings, it wouldn't take too long. Trudeau and all these people, Doug Ford would be here, and they'd be like, how do we get this fungus off the paintings, right? But when we love this art more than we love the landscapes of the art, is that we have to really change our culture to appreciate nature. And so I think a lot of this is a cultural enterprise, is to retool, rewire our minds. And there's that photo of group 7. They're kind of looking at us with the camera quite skeptically, kind of wondering, can we do that? I think we can. And so that's the end there. And I think so, thinking like a man, think big, think positive. There are big problems, but we can solve them with big solutions. And I know it's big benefits. So, thank you.
Start with that. It's just, if anyone has any questions, we have a few minutes. Andrew?
What tree species you
Well, I have a list. And, the one I'm really into right now is red pine. Does anyone know the red pine? So our provincial tree is the white pine. It's the beautiful windswept one. The red pine, I didn't think there was any left in the GTA. If you look at the old records, this area used to be a pinery, a large area. And I was invited out to, have you heard of Lorne Park, the private estate in Mississauga, started in the 1840s? You wheel in there and there's old red pine, apparently original. And then I was out at Lambton Park. Does anyone know where this is? Okay, it's near the junction on the Humber River, north of the old mill. There's about 10 or so apparently original red pine, the last remaining individuals in the GTA. There's a couple in High Park, we think. We've been just starting to age these trees. But there's a tree to bring back. And if you're interested, I have a list for all those cities, but including Toronto.
What are the motivations for planting non-native trees? Is it cost? Is it aesthetics?
So the big thing is it's cheap and quick to grow them, right? And so they're really quick to grow, and over decades, you think that the history of landscape architecture, developing plants into make them pest-free, biodiversity-free, lifeless. So nothing will mess with them, so they grow as quickly as they can. So over hundreds of years, we've genetically modified and crafted species of trees that are so lifeless that they grow quick. And so there is, some of these trees do grow quite well, but then they become invasive like the Norway maple. So they're, some of those benefits have the implications too.
Are you part of the Daimen development, that 10-year plan? Are you
No.
part of that conversation?
No.
Is it something that you're looking to get into, just to sort of educate the people who are planning this entire portion of our city to say that this is something that they really should look into, and to understand that some forward-thinking planning needs to happen, like you said, 5 years to grow these trees and actually populate these areas?
I absolutely, yeah. And I think, when I look at that and I see that they're not planting the plants, I think they're not planting them just because they don't know they could. And actually, truth be told, even if they wanted to, where are they going to get them from? You can't really blame them because there's nowhere to buy them from. So, yeah, I think I'm very excited. The Faculty of Forestry would be thrilled to be part of something like that. Yeah. Cheers.
This means has been pretty good talking to you about that whole situation. That's the status of Earth.
Oh, okay, sorry. The question was about the emerald ash borer in the city of Toronto has been quite on top of it. So, they have, I think the whole ash thing is a complete debacle. And it's awful because we should have prevented it from coming in. We knew where it was coming from. We didn't do it. And then when we started treating the ash, we decided to spend all the money by injecting each ash. It cost $200 per injection with a toxic chemical called triazine that is not even legal in the UK. They don't want it there because it's so toxic. They don't even know what it's going to do. So, you go to a tree nursery, it only costs you $200 to grow a native tree from seed. So we're spending all that money on injecting trees that now we have to inject them every year for $200 so they'll die. The benefit though, the positive thing is that they're finding now, especially in the States where they've done some of this research, is that like any other living thing, 1 to 5% of ash trees are genetically resistant to the emerald ash borer. So what you don't want to inject them. You want to let them die, and the ones that still remain, like the chestnuts, you get those seeds and propagate those because they're genetically resistant. And that's the only way to be able to keep them on the landscape. And then you go to ravines, you cut down ashes, 20% what comes up there. Norway maple. So I think it caught everyone off board and off guard. And so when people get caught off guard, they don't perform properly. That's everyone, not just the city, but the Faculty of Forestry.
No, sorry. Well, I'm going to ask the lady behind you.
I was curious, so I understand like ecology and so
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think so. The most recent data on this from Science and Nature, the actual empirical data, is showing that species are moving westward quickly, more quickly than they're moving northward. And a lot of this might be moving genotypes north or so, but it's a very, very difficult. It would be like injecting yourself with like an anti-malarial drug. It's maybe a good idea, but you really want to be careful what you do. It can't just be a flippant exercise of looking at what's down south. But I think that's a really exciting, important thing to do, and to start a task force of how would you pick those. It's like really, yeah, I think that's really exciting.
Okay, maybe one more question.
Yes, along the same line, not in the context, but you know that examples where non-native species come in and new ecological services or new relationships develop.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the coolest example to think about is about 12,000, 14,000 years ago, there was a mile of ice. The Pleistocene glaciation was around for like 2 million years. Before that, this was tropical, right? So what's happened since the glaciers have melted is there's been a recolonization of this. And the plants recolonize, and then the insects recolonize, and they reform those evolutionary relationships they've had for literally millions of years. Right? So understanding how ecology works and evolution works allows you to figure out how to kind of, and that relates to that question is how would you do it? Because if done in a proper way, it can be done. However, the danger is if you're bringing up things from the south, especially if they're congeneric species, like you're bringing up an oak tree that's just from the south, that could carry with it a disease that would affect the native oak, right? So it's really tricky, but yeah, this would be a really important thing to think about. And I guess part of the answer will be kind of looking at kind of history, long-term history of how this happens. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jim.
I enjoyed that. I also care a lot about trees, too close to my heart, so I'm an easy audience. I care a lot about forests and people connected to forests, and I think that they're going to help save us all now, to be honest. So my presentation is also going to feature forests very heavily, but I promise I will also try to speak to design elements as Eric did. So I grew up in the forest. My house is in a forest by a river. I feel really privileged, I guess, to have grown up that way. And I spent most of my time exploring the forest with my dog. I still do that every chance I get. And I have this one memory when I was about 7 or 8 years old, walking through the forest down to the river. I remember, the way that the light is filtered in the forest and the smells of the leaves and the moss and hearing the songbirds. And then I remember realizing all of a sudden that something wasn't right, and it really just stopped me in my tracks. And the first thing that I noticed, consciously, was that the color of the river in our home was wrong. It was a really dark brown color. And as I stood there looking, I noticed that on the banks of the river, on both banks of the river, there's all these dead fish scattered along the banks. So I didn't really understand what I was witnessing, and I think as a kid sometimes we just internalize those experiences and move on. I didn't tell my parents about it or anything, and it wasn't until years later that I connected the dots, and I realized that what I had witnessed that day was the downstream impacts of a massive deforestation event on about 12,000 acres of forest right next door to my home, on a piece of land that belongs to one of the richest families in the world, a family that is from New Brunswick and owns more land than most royalty in the world. So around that same time, my father took my brother and I up to northern New Brunswick to the Christmas Mountain blockades. And the Christmas Mountains are the headwaters of these mighty rivers in New Brunswick. and it was the last large expanse of old growth forest in New Brunswick. It's about 50,000 acres of old growth forest. So we drove up there, to the blockades, and this region was extremely important to Mi'kmaq and Maliseet First Nations. And, I was just so in awe of these people. Are very curious. They're unlike anyone I'd ever met before. And they're literally putting themselves on the line to defend this forest. And I was really curious to, see this forest that they're fighting so hard for. We were only there for a couple of days, so I didn't get to explore very much. And sadly, that battle was lost, and that forest was cleared for pulp and paper. So fast forward about 10 years, and my brother and I, we borrowed a truck, and with a really good friend, Jeff, we drove back up to the Christmas Mountains to see if we could find some old forest, because we were still really curious to know what old growth looks like in the Maritimes, in New Brunswick. Because you have to understand that New Brunswick was one of the first places in Canada to be colonized. So the forest there, pretty much any forest you see there has been cut 4 or 5 or 6 times already. So it's a shadow of its former self. And we figured we'd go up there and there'd be some, hard access ravine or something where the machines couldn't get in, and we'd find some old forest. We didn't find any old forest. I think it's maybe a little bit of a fool's errand to try to find old growth forest that's undiscovered in New Brunswick. But anyhow, it was a really fun road trip. And on our way back, my good friend Jeff, he actually bought a motorcycle off the side of the road, and he ended up driving that all the way down to Texas, I think, before it blew up. And that sort of started his world travels that eventually landed him on the Zanzibar Islands, where we work today. And the next time we were all together with some other good friends in a tree planting camp in Northern Ontario, we started Community Forest International. So what I'm going to share today is some of the work that we've done together as a group of friends and as an organization over the last 10 years or so. And this photo is the Welcome Brand Forest, so a forest that we successfully saved together in southern New Brunswick. And it's a really special forest, and one of the things that is most special about this forest is our relationship with it. So we've designed our relationship with this forest based on the relationship that it has to our global climate. So all of our decisions, because this is a working forest, we do cut trees, we sell wood to local mills, but all of our design and management decisions are based on helping that forest do what it does best, which is to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back down on Earth where it belongs, in soils and in living trees. If any of you are ever in New Brunswick, feel free to look us up and visit. It's open to the public because we really want to share this model with as many people as possible. Because as Jeff referenced in the opening here, forests are some of our most powerful carbon capture structures on the planet, and the planet needs that desperately now, and we need to design our relationship and our entire forest industry to optimize that service to avoid climate breakdown. So the formal mission of our organization is to overcome climate change, and we do that by working alongside rural communities specifically to help those communities find ways that they can thrive alongside their natural systems, right? So how can people make a living off the land without destroying it? And we work in the Zanzibar Islands, so these are small islands off the east coast of Tanzania, in the Indian Ocean, that are extremely vulnerable to climate change. And we work here in Canada, mainly in the Maritimes. If anyone saw the documentary that came out about our work recently on National Geographic, you'll be familiar with Kokoda, which is one tiny island where we work. It's about 2 kilometers long, half a kilometer wide. And this is Solomon, he's from Kokoda. And this is his farm. His farm actually isn't on Kokoda, it's on Funzi Islet, which is an even smaller island beside Kokoda. It's really cool to have their own satellite farm island. And we have brought a forest-like structure back to Funzi that also produces food by design. So it replaces you know, what was previously this system of agriculture where they were mainly growing corn and burning a lot, and we're seeing, you know, steep decline in their yields. So I just want to, you know, I guess want to clarify that our organization is not like a pure conservation organization. We're very much people-based, so we very much look to, again, designing these systems where people are very much a part of the natural system. So this is not, you know, a project to bring back a purely native forest. It's a project to bring greater ecological health to an island while producing something for people at the same time. And we're really excited about this experiment. It's been sort of successful, and we also hope that, you know, the diversity of this food system, because it mimics the structure and diversity of a natural forest, we hope that it will be more resilient to climate change and the changes in growing conditions in Zanzibar. So just to switch back to southern New Brunswick, this is the region around Welcome Grand Forest. When I was getting ready for this talk, this quote kept coming to mind, which I really like this quote. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And I like this quote because it forces us to, you know, change our perspective, forces us to ask, are we happy with the results? And I don't think anyone you talk to today would tell you they think the results we're getting, that we're seeing today, are perfect. So then, you know, it asks us to take some responsibility for the design, to go back upstream, to look at the design that's producing these results, and get back to work and do better. And we can do better. I think that, you know, I'm not suggesting that people are the only force in the universe, but on this planet, for better or worse, we are a major force. And it's our responsibility, it's also our potential to fix what we've destroyed, now that we are waking up to the damages that we've unleashed. So this is also, you know, a huge opportunity for us. And it's an opportunity that's unique in history, and it's an opportunity that has a very, very short window in which we can act. And you know, I don't want to glaze over how huge this problem is of climate change and the larger ecological crisis. You know, it's a physics problem, and it's time bound. And you know, I read recently, scientists have estimated that about 90% of this dangerous buildup of energy on our planet that we've created, about 90% of it has been absorbed by oceans so far. And it's the equivalent to 3 Hiroshima-level nuclear bombs going off every second in the ocean. It's extremely dangerous buildup of energy. And scientists have also said, and I'm quoting now, that we've unleashed the 6th mass extinction event in roughly the last 540 million years. So it's no joke. And I think for you know, for designers, for all of us, because we're all designers, we all contribute in some way, the biggest question for at least the next 100 years is, how do we design in response to climate change, in response to the climate crisis? It's also really important to note that the climate has already changed significantly. And in places like Zanzibar, where we work, which are these small tropical islands that are very much on the front lines of change, you know, they're already struggling with the impacts of those changes every day. The temperature is increasing. The temperature of the seawater is increasing, which is causing coral bleaching. And coral reefs provide, you know, critical habitat for fish. Islands are dependent on fisheries for food and income. This is causing, you know, a real impact on people's daily lives. Rainfall patterns are shifting. So what this means is that the traditional farming practices are less and less tenable, right? Because the rains don't come when people expect them to, and they don't come in the same volumes as they used to. And there are, you know, clearly linked cases of food shortages in certain parts of Canada you can trace back to erratic rainfall patterns starting years previous. The sea level is rising. This is causing people to retreat back from the coastline. The biggest and the scariest impact of sea level rise is actually when salt water starts retreating into freshwater drinking supplies. There's over 150 sites around Pemba Island, this main island where we work, where salt water has destroyed drinking water supplies or low-lying agricultural lands. And so you can see with these changes, they create negative impacts, and the negative impacts have a knock-on effect that make the next negative impact even worse, and they just amplify each other. And this is what collapse looks like. This is exactly what collapse looks like. And what we need to do is figure out how to design systems that are regenerative, right? Where one change creates a positive change that amplifies the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and we can heal the planet and heal some of these systems. So how do we do that? Well, I definitely don't have all the answers, but we have learned some lessons in our work over the last decade. One of them is that we don't necessarily have to invent new solutions. Sometimes it's just about identifying the things that are good and working and amplifying those things. So working with nature and leveraging our designs to get outsized results. A good example of this is in our spice forest project. So where we've hybridized forest restoration with spice production. And I was naive enough to think that this was like my idea. And we started experimenting with, again, growing spices in forest. And we're seeing some really good results early on. And eventually people, learned about our project on Pembroke Island and approached us and said, hey, you should come see our farm, because that's what we've been doing for the last 30 years. So this is Hamad, and his farm is one of my favorites, probably my favorite farm on all of Pembroke Island, because I've seen it transform over the last 5 or 6 years from, again, largely a monoculture of corn and cassava into this forest-like system that's now producing these really high-value spices, along with all the other ecosystem services. And Hamad is just, he's a green thumb, he's really enthusiastic, his enthusiasm is contagious, and he travels around Pembroke Island, sharing his knowledge with others. This is Mr. Mataka. I think of him as like the godfather of spice. This is someone who has been doing this for decades, for 30 years. And when we visited him, we saw like his farm and the community around him that were, emulating his model. Our job changed. So the question became less about what's the technical design here to build a food system like the forest, and more about how do we amplify what they're already doing. And that became a question of the design of human systems and design of economics, largely. Because agriculture globally is one of the largest contributors to deforestation. But if we can grow food and spices in systems that look like this, we can take those huge flows of energy and resources, point them towards something that's more regenerative. And I'm not suggesting that we can grow all our food like this. I don't think we can. But things like spices, we certainly can. It's already been proven. And so now in my job, I'm trying to figure out, again, how do we drive more wealth and resources to these communities so they can do more of this work and create those positive knock-on effects. Because this is where I would prefer to buy my spice. Okay, another really important principle is making the communities and the people who are most directly impacted by our designs the leaders in the design process. This goes without saying, but it's so rare. This is Kiweni Islet, another small islet where we work. It's a little hard to make out. This is at low tide, and so most of that land is actually not habitable. Kiweni is just this really narrow strip of land pointing out to the ocean. And the areas highlighted in red are the very last coral forest on Kiweni Island, and some of the last coral forest in all of Zanzibar. This really fragile forest type grows on really shallow soils that if we cut it down, the soils wash it over and never comes back. So the first thing we did when we started working with Kiweni is we lobbied the government to hand over land rights to the community. This is so fundamental. It's really hard to expect people to make long-term investments in restoring the natural world if those investments can be taken away overnight. And this is a huge challenge in Tanzania, where the majority of people rely on things like fishing or farming to make a living, and 95% of farmers don't own the land that they work on. So how do you expect them to make these long-term investments in building regenerative systems if those investments don't pay off overnight, and yet they can lose the land overnight? So after we won the community land rights, we started a participatory design process where the community maps all their resources, and they decide, for example, what areas are going to be designated for grazing livestock, where are they going to plant trees, where are the marine resources going to be extracted and on what season, right? So building the governance to self-govern their resource base. And every community is different. They all make different decisions. In the case of Key Wenigo, they decided that the last remaining coral forest, they would conserve it. They wouldn't harvest it anymore. And this kind of thing is really inspiring to me because it indicates that empowered people can be like a really restorative force when they're given the right tools. Because these people are already struggling with a lot of challenges, and yet they were willing to realize kind of the error in their ways and to make sacrifices to correct those errors. So just a few months after we had successfully secured those land rights, we got a call from the Sheha of Cuba and Shamian. The Sheha is like the mayor of this local cluster of villages. And he said, we have a problem. Some people have arrived from outside the community and they're cutting our forest. So we went there and we saw there was a work crew there cutting the forest. And we did our own investigation. What we found was that an outside developer from outside Zanzibar had paid off the right officials and was building a hotel. So they were developing this area for a hotel. And they knew that tourists coming from the outside to this this tropical paradise, they want to see a forest. But instead of building a hotel like beside the forest, they put it right on the forest. So we managed to halt that for now. But it's these experiences that really drive the point home for me about kind of how small we are sometimes, and the power of the forces that we're working against, where we have these economic systems that are designed to extract wealth from the natural world, that are the money that can be made destroying the world is so out of proportion with the money that can be made restoring it and protecting it. And so again, that's why in my job, I'm increasingly looking at the design of our economic systems, not just our technical food and agricultural systems. So just to reinforce that point, this is the Amazon, of course. We don't work in the Amazon. I wish we did. This is like a life goal for me. And I want to draw your attention to the bottom of the frame, where you can see the forest is rapidly being destroyed. But that destruction is coming up against some hard edges. And so if we zoom in there, what you can see is that these areas that are highlighted in yellow, these are all indigenous reserves. And you can see that the deforestation is just it's going forward at breakneck speeds, and then it hits these indigenous reserves and it just stops. So in Brazil, only about 1% of deforestation occurs within indigenous reserves. Right? So if you empower the people who are most directly connected to these ecosystems, they will save these ecosystems. They'll save us all. Okay, and just a note on that, there's been some political changes in Brazil that put that all at risk right now, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. Work with natural infrastructure instead of undermining it, and it will protect us. Mangrove forests are a really good example of this. So for anyone who doesn't know, mangrove forests, they grow half on the land and half in the ocean, in the intertidal zone. And they protect coastal communities from flooding. And they do it really, really effectively. And they're just really beautiful ecosystems too. If you picture like paddling through a canopy of a forest, underneath you, you've got like fish swimming through the trunks. They're really special. And they surround these islands headlined like a bioshield, basically, protecting against sea level rise. And I often compare this type of infrastructure to what we call our gray infrastructure, so our built infrastructure. Because we could build a seawall to protect these communities out of concrete and steel. But the second you finish building that seawall, it starts to degrade, basically. It starts to erode, and it needs to be maintained over its entire lifespan. Compare that to a mangrove forest that accrues value over time and self-repairs and provides countless co-benefits. So mangrove forests are also supercritical fish habitat. And they also happen to store more carbon than almost any other forest type in the world. They call it blue carbon. So not only do they protect the local community against climate change and sea level rise, but they protect the entire planet by stabilizing the climate. And this is not something that you only see around tropical islands. So I'm going back to southern New Brunswick again and Weldon Bed Forest. When we saved this forest in 2012, literally within weeks, a large forestry company next door started clearing over 1,000 hectares. And I'll just play a video of that work in progress. So when you look at the risk to Canadians in climate, in changing climate, the #1 risk is flooding. We're very flood prone as a population, and it's a complex issue. One of the reasons is that we traditionally build our communities near water. The other is that extreme weather events are becoming more frequent. And the third, and the one that you can see really clearly in New Brunswick, is we've removed the natural infrastructure from our landscapes that protect us against extremities. So forests are like big sponges. They soak up excess water and then they slowly release it back into the landscape. They're like natural shock absorbers. So we've removed the shock absorbers from all our headwaters that protect our communities. And New Brunswick has accessed federal disaster relief more than any other province or territory in Canada over the last 10 years, all due to flooding. And this is what we've done to our headwaters. So again, we need to look at the system that's producing this result, right? And change it entirely. And I just want to speak a little bit about the Acadian forest, which is the really special natural forest that we have growing in the Maritimes. It's one of the most diverse and endangered temperate forest types in the world, and almost nobody knows about it. And because it's almost been completely wiped off the face of the continent, only about 5% of it remains in a sort of pre-colonial condition. The reason it's so special is because it's this blend of the more boreal forest type that's to our north, and then the more hardwood or deciduous tree dominated forest type to our south. So it's this mixing. We have both the coniferous trees, the ones that hold their needles all year round, and we have the deciduous trees, the ones that drop their leaves in the winter, all mixing together in the Acadian forest. And that diversity creates a lot of resilience. It has a really low disturbance regime, so the Acadian forest really doesn't burn, maybe once every few thousand years in a natural state. And it's extremely carbon dense. So again, forests are our most powerful carbon capture structures on the planet. And the Acadian forest, in particular, stores a lot of carbon. And we're scrapping it, right? We're scrapping it. So we've got the technology to get us through some of these huge challenges. We just need to switch it on. So Canada is basically the second largest forest on Earth. Okay, it's about 5 million square kilometers of forest. So our communities and our cities are really just sort of sprinkled across this vast forest landscape. We all live in this huge forest. And today, this forest is one of the most important solutions to climate change that exists. I can't overstate that. And I think that this is obviously a massive challenge of redesigning our human systems, our economic systems, to let the forest do what it does best. But that, if we do that, Canada as a country can provide this massive service to the world and help prevent global climate breakdown. And I think that is a really exciting and important mission. The forest can save us, it can protect us if we protect it. Okay, and finally, storytelling is super important. Stories are fundamental to human culture. They change how we see the world, and then that changes how we behave in the world. And climate change and the ecological crisis, these are problems of human behavior. We got to change the human systems to make space for the rest of life on planet. And one thing that we can all do as individuals, no matter where we are, to help this is just to talk about it, to tell people around you that you care about it, and to think about it. Because change historically has only ever happened when enough people started thinking and moving in the same direction together. So I think, you hear a lot about how people's individual actions don't matter. And I mean, it's right, your individual, consumer choices or whatever, they have a minimal impact in the grand scheme of things, but it's collective impact that makes change, and the collective impact doesn't work without you. So, I get really disappointed by people who are defeatist about these challenges, because I think defeatism contributes to the problem, right? It's that attitude that's actually going to sink us. And there's, if you're looking for inspiration, just look to our friends in Zanzibar, right? So these are islands that are on the front lines of climate change, one of the poorest regions in the world per capita. People have, taken stock of the challenge ahead of them and responding with positive action and hope. And I just want to play a clip from the film about Dakota specifically, and just end with the thought that, these are small islands, and these small islands are basically like microcosms for our whole planet, right? So, what can we do to mimic the success, to follow the leadership of places like Dakota in our own communities here in Toronto, in Canada, more broadly?
Naweza kusema eneo ambalo limetengwa kwa ajili ya uhifadhi wa misitu ni karibu ya 40% ya kisiwa cha Makuta. Lakini hata hivyo kuna yale maeneo mengine ambayo hayakutengwa kwa ajili ya uhifadhi, lakini tulisema wakulima wenyewe au wanajamii wenyewe wanazilipua nazo kusifanya kupanda miti. Kwa hivyo naweza kuchukua na haya, naweza kusema ni karibu 50% eneo inaweza kufanya kazi nzuri. Naweza kusema hadi hapa tulipo ni karibu miaka 5.
So now we have a few minutes for questions for David. Gentleman in the red orange.
You told the story early on of the defeat of an attempt to save the Brunswick forest by people. I'm also from the ground that feel very strongly about my own data and the data talking about action, and I think some of you do that. Do you know any good stories to tell very briefly of Indigenous champions in the American and working who are working against their play?
Thank you. Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the question was examples of First Nations leadership, successful leadership in the Maritimes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is one of the areas where I take most hope from in Canada today. And I mean, the example that comes to mind is the Elsipogtog First Nation and their successful halting of natural gas, hydraulic fracturing in Brunswick, if anyone's familiar. They single-handedly stopped the advancement of natural gas hydraulic fracturing in Brunswick, and by putting their lives on the line. It was a very violent confrontation, and this is very recently, and pushed the provincial government to put a moratorium on hydraulic fracturing in the entire province, which is now, with the change in government, being pressured again. But yeah, that's one huge example.
And you talked about sort of having to move in an area of expertise. Once you landed in the banking bars, you realized that you really had to look at the situation from an economical standpoint, because that's where you were going to sort of facilitate the change through. Can you talk a little bit about how you started to do that?
Yeah, sure. So the question was, I guess, arriving in a new place with not a whole lot of good ideas about the local context, and finding your place, how to find your place where we can contribute most constructively. Yeah, that's it's a painful process. It's a very humbling process. I mean, I think we were lucky because when we started this work, we were in our early 20s, and we landed there with ideals and a lot of good intentions, but we literally didn't know anything. So we very, very, very early on just followed the lead of our friends there and saw the ideas that we were bringing to the table just fail so hard, so much, that it was easier, I think, for us to make that change, and to realize that what we were bringing was our privilege. It was the ability to master the English language and write proposals and get funding and share the story of our friends with the global north, where wealth and power is concentrated. To take lessons from our colleagues in Zanzibar and apply them to our work here in Canada. Yeah, so it's a complex issue, right? I feel like when you're using your privilege, you're also enforcing it. But what else are you going to do? We've got to do something with our privilege. So listen to the community, listen to the people you're working with, and for us, it's my ability to freely travel the world and to connect with people like you all, to tell the story and to help drive more support to my friends in Zanzibar.
The gray at the back.
So the question was if there were the possibility to use some of these forest-based agriculture systems from Zanzibar in Brazil. Yeah, definitely. And I'm not going to remember the name, but these systems aren't new. We didn't invent them. There are systems in the Amazon that are ancient, food-producing jungle systems that have been cultivated over millennia, maybe. So it's not new technology. It's like rediscovering a technology that already existed. Yeah. I mean, I wish I could remember the name, but Brazil, yes, there are generations old techniques just like this. One story I remember hearing is again where people are being displaced by these deforestation efforts, and the conflict usually can become quite violent. And there have been communities who have been run into the jungle basically by people who are clearing land by threat of violence, and have survived because they are retreating into landscapes that their ancestors cultivated for food production, so they can still survive. They've been running on auto mode for hundreds of years to the point where people can still live off.
Yeah, Hardie.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what kind of impact introducing spices into the forest has on wildlife.
Yeah, so the question is, what kind of impact does introducing spices into a forest have on the ecology? So Zanzibar is, traditionally a spice island. The original forest was cleared hundreds of years ago and converted to plantation-style agriculture. So there's very little natural forest left. So we don't introduce spices into natural forests. We're starting from scratch. So we're starting from degraded landscapes, bringing forests back, including spice crops, because that provides a cash incentive for folks to make that conversion. Yeah, so lots of opportunity to study that, but I can't really answer the question.
Okay.
Can you speak to the changes in the economy? Like we're talking about the design of the economy, how that's affecting the forest, Zanzibar negative. Can you speak to any positive changes that can happen, say, in Canada, that forest in Canada can benefit?
Forests in Canada? So I just
say like New Brunswick get like very local.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the first question was about changing economic systems to get better results in Zanzibar, and then also what are opportunities in New Brunswick, if I understand correctly. So just to touch on Zanzibar, tourists love this region. Where we work, Pemba is more remote, and so we're just starting to see development move in there because people are looking for locations that are off the beaten track. And I don't think we're going to stop there. I think there's a huge opportunity to shape that development for more positive outcomes. Right now, it's being really terrible outcomes. So maybe how do you design a hotel to have the greatest possible impact on Pemba Island? That would be a good project, rather than just creating something that's purely designed to extract wealth. In New Brunswick, so the world needs these climate solutions, and our forests are ready to provide them. And the Maritimes is unique compared to the rest of Canada because actually about half of the forest land belongs to small family forest operators, but 50% of the forest belongs to people in rural areas who for generations have relied on the forest for livelihood. And in today's global markets, they've been really marginalized. It's very difficult to make a living off of forests. It's very difficult to realize any kind of revenue by doing anything else aside from clear cutting it. So we've got the highest rates of clear cutting in New Brunswick right now. So if we can create a financial incentive for people to manage forests for climate services, pay for those services, that's a massive opportunity. There's 80,000 family forests across the Maritimes. The forest is there. The people are there with a professional capacity to optimize the forest for climate security. We can create the economic systems to support them in doing that. We can make a globally significant contribution to climate security and also help create opportunities for these struggling rural communities. So that's a big part of our mission today. That's right, a new forest product, a new job.
One more question.
That's a great question. So what was our process for successfully having land rights handed over to communities, and how are they codified? Yeah. So this was, like everything we do, a very exploratory process. When we first set out, so I can't take credit for any of it. We have an amazing team in Tanzania so we've got 18 team members and a board of directors. They run their own organization, Tanzanian board of directors. They do everything pretty much on their own. So they have network connections to apply those pressures. And the first, so it's lobbying. It's like meeting with the right officials. It's paying the Department of Lands to survey the land. It's working with lawyers to push through the change. The government had made a commitment to, at a national level, to hand over more management rights to communities for forest land. So they've made that policy commitment, but there haven't been any action. So we use that as a lever. The first 6 communities we worked with, we actually had the deed for the property handed over entirely, with basically no restrictions. The government kind of got wise to that and made it very difficult for us afterwards to do anything that drastic. So now what we do is we work through community forest management agreements. So it's like a long-term lease where the community has certain use rights over the forest and the land, but they have to adhere to certain standards, or else the government can draw those rights. Yeah.